On a Friday afternoon in November of 1963, a midnight blue Lincoln Continental convertible was rolling through the streets of Dallas, Texas, carrying the President of the United States through a cheering crowd. The top was down. The November sun had burned off the morning clouds. Kennedy had insisted on it. 12 minutes later, that car was a crime scene. What happened next is one of the most documented events in American history. But the car, what happened to that car after Dallas? That part of the story almost nobody tells, because that Continental did not get retired or destroyed or quietly parked in some government lot. It went back to work. It carried the next 4 presidents through the Cold War, across 32 countries, through 2 more assassination attempts, all the way into the Carter administration. 14 years. That car kept going for 14 years. And it started out as a last-ditch gamble to save a brand that was about to get cancelled. By 1958, Lincoln was in serious trouble. Ford's luxury division had spent the decade doing what every American automaker was doing, building bigger, flashier, more chrome-covered cars every year, in a kind of automotive arms race with Cadillac and Chrysler Imperial that rewarded excess and punished restraint. The 1958 Lincoln was over 227 inches long. It weighed close to 2.5 tons. It had diagonal headlights that Ford's own designers privately called the slant-eyed monster. Some automotive historians were kinder, calling them unconventional. Most people just called them ugly. The public agreed. Sales collapsed. Between 1958 and 1960, Lincoln lost $60 million. In today's money, that is roughly $650 million. The Edsel had failed spectacularly that same year, and the man who actually ran Ford, a sharp, data-driven executive named Robert McNamara, was starting to have quiet conversations about whether Lincoln should keep existing at all. McNamara loved the Ford Falcon. Practical, cheap to build, and sold in enormous numbers. He looked at Lincoln the way a good accountant looks at an expensive hobby, with affection maybe, but mostly with concern. By late 1958, internal discussions at Ford were getting uncomfortable. The word nobody wanted to say out loud was discontinue. The designers working in their studios at Ford's sprawling Dearborn headquarters had no idea how close to the edge they were. But someone in management did, and that person made a decision that changed everything. In the basement of Ford's styling center, there was a narrow little room the designers called the Stiletto Studio. It was run by Elwood Engel, and it was there in 1958 that he started working on a design proposal for the next Thunderbird. Engel was a precise designer with an unusual quality. His co-workers said he had an uncanny sense of what would actually sell, as opposed to what would win design awards. He wanted his Thunderbird proposal to be the opposite of everything Detroit was doing in 1958. No fins, no chrome overload. Just 2 long, clean, horizontal blades along the body sides, a simple greenhouse, and a sense of restraint that would have looked at home in Milan. When Ford's product planning committee met to choose the next Thunderbird, they went with a sportier, more conventional design. Engel's proposal lost, but William Clay Ford, Henry Ford's son, sat in that meeting and looked at Engel's rejected design and said something nobody expected. He said it was too nice for a Thunderbird. And he said it should be the new Continental. McNamara, the man who had been quietly considering pulling the plug on Lincoln entirely, looked at the same design and agreed. He gave Engel a crash program. Add 2 more doors, 2 more seats, and turn this T-Bird sketch into a Lincoln Continental. Lincoln's last chance would be built from a car that had just been turned down for a different job. The engineering challenge was significant. McNamara wanted the new Continental smaller than the disastrous models from 1958 to 1960, cheaper to build and profitable from the start. The team at Lincoln had to take a more compact platform, give it a unibody structure instead of a body-on-frame setup, and make it stiff enough to support a 4-door convertible without flexing like a cardboard box on the highway. They pulled it off, but there were compromises. The designers had originally wanted the 4-door sedan to be a true pillarless hardtop with no B-pillar at all, just the doors latching to each other and the floor. They had to give that up. On the convertibles, the curved rear door glass was so close to the roof moulding that it would catch on the rubber seal every time you opened the door, so Ford's engineers wired in sensors and relays that automatically lowered the window a few inches whenever the door handle was pressed. An elegant solution. It probably took 2 months to figure out. The doors themselves became the car's signature. Coach doors on the rear, hinged at the back, swinging open toward the front. People called them suicide doors because if you opened one at highway speed, the airflow could theoretically take your arm with it. Lincoln called them coach doors and pointed out correctly that they made getting in and out of the rear seat considerably more dignified, especially in formal attire. Both things were true. Every Continental that came off the Wixom assembly plant in Michigan went through a 150-mile road test before it was allowed to leave. Not a sample. Not a spot check, every single car. Paint inspected by hand. Doors opened and closed dozens of times. Quality control workers could reject a car for a door gap they did not like the sound of. Ford backed all of it with a 2-year, 24,000-mile warranty, which was double what anyone else in America was offering. When the car arrived at auto shows in late 1960, the reaction was unlike anything Lincoln had seen in years. Car Life gave it their Engineering Excellence Award. The Industrial Design Institute gave it a bronze medal, a recognition they almost never handed to a production automobile. Critics who had spent the decade watching Detroit compete to see who could add the most chrome to the most surface area looked at this clean, slab-sided Lincoln and somewhat grudgingly admitted that American cars could do something right. McNamara had been preparing to kill Lincoln. Instead, he had accidentally saved it. In 1961, the White House was looking for a new presidential limousine. The Secret Service acquired a standard 1961 Lincoln Continental 4-door convertible that retailed for $7,347 and sent it to a custom coach builder in Cincinnati, Ohio, called Hess Eisenhardt. Their other clients included the Queen of England. The government leased the car from Ford for $500 a year and then spent $200,000 in modifications. The convertible was stretched, with an extra 41 inches added between the front and rear doors. The rear seat was fitted with a hydraulic lift that could raise it 10.5 inches to make the president more visible in a motorcade. 3 interchangeable roof sections were built, a removable steel section, a clear plastic bubble top for weather protection, and the option to run completely open. Retractable steps and grab handles were added to the rear fenders for Secret Service agents. Radio telephones, floodlights for night motorcades, and a siren that could rattle windows 2 blocks away were installed. The Secret Service gave it 2 code names, SS-100X and X-100. President Kennedy loved it. He had a standing order that the roof should be left off as long as weather allowed. He liked being visible. He liked the contact with crowds. 4 days before Dallas, on a trip to Tampa, he had reiterated that instruction. On the morning of November the 22nd, 1963, rain showers had cleared the Dallas area by mid-morning. Secret Service agents made the call to leave the roof off for the motorcade from Love Field to the Trade Mart, where President Kennedy was scheduled to speak. The route wound through downtown Dallas to maximize the crowd exposure. At 12:30 in the afternoon on Elm Street in Dealey Plaza, the Lincoln Continental turned left and entered history. What happened next is documented in more detail than almost any other event of the 20th century. The Warren Commission would fill 26 volumes. The car itself was impounded immediately as a crime scene and examined by investigators. The midnight blue paint, the leather interior, the chrome and glass and steel of that Continental, all of it now evidence. The decision the government had to make was what to do with the car after the investigation. They decided to keep it, not out of sentiment, out of practicality. SS-100X was a one-of-a-kind vehicle. Building a replacement would take time and money that, in the chaos of those weeks, nobody wanted to spend. A month after the assassination, a project called Project D2 was authorized. Hess Eisenhardt, the same Cincinnati coach builder that had done the original modifications, would now do the rebuild. They stripped the car, added titanium armor plating to the back of the rear seat, lined the fuel tank with urethane foam to suppress explosion, fitted bulletproof glass, added a permanent hardtop roof, and repainted it. Project D2 cost more than $500,000. It was completed on May 1st, 1964. The car was delivered back to the White House in June. White House staffers started calling it the Death Car. The name spread quickly enough that Lyndon Johnson, who had his own complicated feelings about riding in the vehicle in which his predecessor had been killed, reportedly ordered it repainted again, this time a darker shade with silver metallic flakes in the paint so it would glitter under lights. The midnight blue that had been so elegant in 1961 had become something nobody wanted to look at directly. The car went back to work anyway. Between 1964 and 1977, the rebuilt Lincoln Continental presidential limousine logged service across 32 countries. It carried Lyndon Johnson through the turbulent years of Vietnam and the Great Society. It took Richard Nixon to China in 1972, one of the most photographed diplomatic moments of the Cold War. Behind it, barely visible, was a Lincoln that had been rebuilt after an assassination. It carried Gerald Ford through the first year of his unexpected presidency. In September of 1975, Ford was the target of 2 separate assassination attempts within 17 days. The first was by Lynette Fromm in Sacramento. The second was by Sarah Jane Moore in San Francisco. Ford escaped both. He was not in the Lincoln Continental when either attempt happened. He was in a different car entirely. The death car, it turned out, was not always where the action was. Jimmy Carter used it through the late 1970s, including a trip to London in May of 1977 for an economic summit. That was the car's final foreign assignment. It was retired to Ford later that year after 16 years of service, 50,000 miles of ground travel, and what the government estimated at over 1 million miles by air, flown in the cargo holds of military transport aircraft to wherever the president needed to be. Ford accepted the car back and, after a restoration, donated it to the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, about 30 miles from the Wixom assembly plant where it was originally built. It went on public display in 1981. If you have ever visited the Henry Ford Museum, you know the room. The Lincoln is displayed in a long hall alongside other presidential vehicles and significant American machines. It sits behind barriers, restored to its post-assassination configuration with the permanent hard top and the darker paint. People walk up to it and stop. Older visitors, people who were alive in 1963, sometimes stand there for a long time without saying anything. Some of them cry. Museum staff have mentioned this so often over the years that it has become something they plan for. The car is not dramatic looking, it is actually smaller than you would expect, and in the museum lighting it looks almost ordinary. A large, clean-lined American convertible from 1961, wearing the modifications that were added after the worst day of the Kennedy administration. You have to know what you're looking at, but that is maybe the point. It does not look like a monument, it looks like a car that went to work every day and did its job, through things nobody had planned for, until the job was finally done. Lincoln was $60 million in the hole and weeks away from being cancelled when Elwood Engel's rejected Thunderbird sketch saved the whole division. The Continental became the benchmark for American luxury, the standard against which every luxury sedan would be compared for a decade. It was chosen for presidential service because it was the best car available, built to a standard that nobody else had matched. And then it carried a president to Dealey Plaza, came home, was rebuilt, and kept going. Would you have kept it in service? The Secret Service and the White House made the call to keep the car rolling for 14 more years. Some people think that was cold pragmatism. Some think it was the right kind of respect, not hiding from what happened, just continuing. The car did its job. If you want to see the other side of this story, the part about what happened when Lincoln tried to recapture this magic in the 1970s and ended up with something that made the original designers physically uncomfortable, that video is coming next. Subscribe so you do not miss it.